Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and I'd also like to thank Sharq Forum for organizing this very interesting event. I'm an academic, and it's not often that I, as an academic, get the opportunity to spend a day listening to people, practitioners and policymakers. So I think this is a very interesting forum, and I've learned a lot from people that I've only read about and heard about. I'm also faced with a very interesting challenge that, as a historian, I've been asked to think about the future. But that's, in some ways, that is liberating to think about the future, because I can really say whatever I want, because all of it is going to become true, or maybe not. But nobody can challenge me on the future. But I would like to maybe think about the future as a historian, and to think about how we can maybe think about sort of broader trends of the past and how that may sort of look about in the future. And I was inspired by the remarks by Mr. Acker this morning about that the World War I is not fully finished. So I'd like to sort of use that sort of theme. To what extent will be some of the issues that were thought to be resolved in the past are actually not resolved and will be needed to be resolved in the near and distant future. And as I've been listening to all the wonderful papers and discussions here today, I've been thinking a lot about Ibn Khaldun, who I consider to be sort of the very first modern global thinker, and how he thought about sort of time and how he thought about the past and the future. And he, in some ways, he had a very cyclical view of the time. And he had thinking about how there's a regime in the urban center who is getting very comfortable with power and very comfortable with the luxury, getting fat and lazy, who are then overthrown by the hungry rural peoples who come in and overthrow them, and then they themselves become comfortable and lazy, and then so on and so forth, to be overthrown by another people. So he had a very cyclical view. So to what extent, what would Ibn Khaldun think about the current political Islamic movements in this region? Well, how would he interpret what he was seeing? But in some ways, the Islamic movements of the 20th century are, of course, sort of a classic social justice movement who are in the sort of post-Enlightenment era, who use the opportunity to critique the status quo. And I would say that the critique was compelling because it spoke to the real injustices of the times. This was a social justice movement that alerted people to how the political situation was not benefiting the society at large, how there was a great disconnect between the rhetoric of the elite and the needs of the people. This was also in the post-imperial state of the Middle East, sort of in the immediate post-World War era, where we have the new emerging nation states who are putting their stamp on the things. And so this movement is emerging in this post-Enlightenment, post-imperial movement, and served as an opposition group who was maybe sort of looking to replace the comfortable people at the top, if we think of it in the sort of Ibn Khaldunian way. But where are we, though, right now? And I'm wondering, sort of in the beginning of the 21st century, we're still in the post-Enlightenment era, we're still in the post-imperial era, but there's sort of the third era that I would like us to consider the implications of, and to what extent that might have a bearing of the current situation and the future situation of the political Islamic parties. And that is sort of this new information age that we find ourselves in. And to what extent are we informing ourselves to death? To what extent are we living in a post-information age that in the past the governmental elites had a monopoly on information and could really control what we knew and how we knew it, and to a certain extent. But to what extent, should we, how is that changing our criteria, our values, and our visions of the world? Now, this new information age is so exciting, of course, but it's also quite troubling in very many different ways. And we haven't quite appreciated, what that will bring. On the one hand, it has this incredibly democratic element to it, that anybody can access information at any time about anything, anywhere. Yet at the same time, governments are also, they can really track who you are, what you're doing, what you're accessing, where you are, and so on and so forth. So never before have governments have so much information about you, about us as citizens. So this is sort of a frightening situation, is that we are willingly giving the powerful so much information about ourselves, which, the Stasi, the East German secret police would have loved to have the information that Facebook and Google have about our daily behavior. So how will any kind of opposition party, any kind of political party, how should they maneuver in this sort of post-information stage? So that is number one. The number two that I would like to maybe think about is, what is power going to look like in this post-information age? In the past, power has been sort of associated with something in very in very concrete ways, and if you were in opposition, you would sort of think about addressing and challenging that power in very concrete ways, and your hope was to gain the power that they had. So in a very sort of Ibn Khaldunian way, you were hoping to rush in and overtake that aspect. Now, is that the kind of power that will prevail in the future? Is the kind of power and strength that we have associated with the past, is that the kind of power that will prevail? What have we seen in the 21st century? In Iraq and Afghanistan, we've had the world's uncontested superpower, the United States of America, this incredible military mighty power, has not been able to exert its influence and has not been able to exert its designs and desires on Afghanistan and Iraq. And it did that despite all its power that it had. So it just shows that power is changing. It is not necessarily nested in the traditional power structures. So to what extent should we rethink what power is in the 21st century? The third element that I'd like to think about is the role of the environment and the role of the environment in the future, and what political Islamic movements will have to say about the environment. On the one hand, it's the natural environment and the significant challenges of climate change and so on and so forth, but also about the urban environment, the development of these mega cities who need to provide basic services of transportation and air quality and water and so on and so on for its inhabitants. To what extent, what is the role of political parties, any political party, in addressing these very significant rural and urban issues and problems? And finally, leading to the, to what extent is the time of World War I over? Is it over? 2 years ago, it was 2016, we celebrated and talked a lot about Sykes-Picot. In 2017, there was a lot of discussion about the Balfour Declaration. And now in 2018, it will, of course, be the 100-year end of the World War I. So we'll be seeing a lot of events and talks about the end of World War I and what was happening. And so I'm just wondering to what extent we should use this opportunity to think critically about what are the unresolved issues that still haven't been solved by World War.
There are many.
There definitely are many. But there's one aspect that I would like to maybe sort of to end with, and that is sort of World War I sort of started the nation state of the nationalists' projects. And in many countries, nationalism and the nation state was very much tied up to a secular nationalist project. So to what extent is that one of the things that will be we can think about will be necessary to expand is the idea of the nation? Is the resolution of World War I to continue with the current nation states, or is it to utilize different kinds of narratives and discourses in terms of the nation, and not just have it be at the purview of a particular kind of ideology? So I see these as some possible future scenarios, your favorite word, for the Middle East. Thank you.
Okay.